Welcome to another AgGateway Europe webinar. I want to thank Connie Graumans, the Managing Director of AgGateway Europe, for organizing this event. My name is Jim Wilson, and I'm President of AgGateway Global Network. Today, Vic Vandecaveye and Dan Danford are with me to discuss ADAPT for Data Interoperability, brought to you by AgGateway Europe and IOF2020. Vic is the Industry Relations Manager for EMEA, Precision Solutions and Telematics for CNH Industrial. Dan holds a similar role for CNH for NAFTA. Dan, tell us more about your role in CNH and then transition to your presentation.
Thank you, Jim. Well, as Jim said, my role is Industry Relations Manager with the CNH Industrial Precision Solutions and Telematics Group. And in that role, I interact with a lot of ag data facing industry organizations that cooperate to solve common industry problems. And I'm involved with AgGateway, and that's who I'm presenting on behalf of today on their solution ADAPT. So with that, I'm going to jump right into it. As you see from our presentation title, we're calling ADAPT a Rosetta Stone for agricultural data. And it's a problem that AgGateway, one of many interoperability problems that AgGateway was formed to resolve. AgGateway is an organization that was started in North America, but is now a global organization with the idea that different regional versions of AgGateway, including AgGateway Europe, would be formed to solve the problems that they have. But there are so many global similarities that they'll be able to share learnings along the way. What you see here is a list of some of the members. Along the side, I wanted to show that this is a sampling of some of the OEMs like CNH Industrial who are members, but you can see that we are far outnumbered by many other industries, such as in the chemical industry, retails, and many software companies. So where did we start with this? What problem were we trying to solve? And this visual kind of summarizes that issue, which is data interoperability. Many years ago, many companies like CNH were designing proprietary data formats for security reasons. Now, years later, the culture has changed, and many operations have multiple brands, many different manufacturers involved in their operation, and they need to make all of that data work together to be efficient. And so several years ago, AgGateway came together to try to solve this issue, and what they came up with was ADAPT. And before I get into more of the details, I wanted to make sure that I showed this slide to show that there is a need for both the solution of AEF, which is the ISOBUS or ISOXML formats, as well as AgGateway solutions like ADAPT. But here in this visual, it gives a high-level overview of where they work together and where one is favored over the other. At the top, you see machine-to-machine communications, much more of a solution for ISOBUS. In the middle, there's a combination of ISOBUS and ADAPT type solutions for field operations data, and that's where the telematics is broadcasting that information into FMISs, and when you need to transport between FMISs, that's where ADAPT becomes much more of a solution. And then down at the bottom, it's very much a B2B. After the field operations, after the data has been created and needs to be translated into other formats, that's where you would find ADAPT. My overall point being that ISOBUS and ADAPT work together. In fact, they depend upon each other. So before I get into more detail, I wanted to make sure that I'm going to be using some terms and everyone understands. FMIS simply means Farm Management Information System, or a software as a service that farms might be using. MICS is simply the onboard computer or equipment display that might be in the farm equipment that we want to get the data from. And then there's the ADAPT framework itself. It's the open source SDK that everything else is based upon. And then the ADAPT plugin, which is actually the proprietary plugin that is built. There's an open source plugin and a proprietary plugin, and so I'll get into that detail. So first, I want to give this overview of how ADAPT works when you are trying to transform the data from a proprietary format into a usable format within an FMIS. You start with the proprietary data that exists on the equipment display within the machine, and through an offline capability of the ADAPT plugin, you run it through the ADAPT framework with a series of plugins. Here you see a combination of what it represents some of the OEMs. Some of these have existing ADAPT plugins today. Others are working on them. But think of this as a future vision that shows all the OEMs have their ADAPT plugin working, and so it has that translation capability from that proprietary format. Also, you see the ADAPT serialization plugin, and we'll demonstrate how that works later, but that's basically moving ADAPT format data from FMIS to another FMIS. We also have an ISOBUS plugin that has been built. Those two plugins at the top are actually open source solutions, and we expect many more open source plugins to be added to this framework later on, which will make the ADAPT capabilities even more valuable. Down at the bottom, we have the reference data API, which uses context items to reference relevant geopolitical context data. And what you end up with is a readable format that you can use within the FMIS, and then the FMIS has the ability to transform it however they would like. So here are the five primary components that I just kind of went through. The ADAPT data model itself is the conceptual mapping elements that are used to determine it is what we really refer to as the Rosetta Stone itself. Then the ADAPT framework is what is used to do that mapping and managing the plugins. Then number 3 is the OEM plugin. This is the essential element. This is what manufacturers like CNH have to create, because we have to go through our development to make sure that we're mapping all of our proprietary data, all of our proprietary terms and functions, and make sure that we've conceptually mapped them to ADAPT. Then 4A and 4B are those open source plugins I just referred to, the serialization plugin and the ISO plugin. And then down at the bottom, the reference data API, which is a RESTful API that provides those definitions that you need that are relevant to your area, which is what makes it an international solution. So again, I've gone through the common data model and what it is, and this is the power that drives all of these solutions. Here's an example of what that data model looks like, just a snippet of it, but it's actually the conceptual mapping to make sure that we know what something is called in one system is referring to this other item that has a different label in another system. Then the framework itself, the OEM plugins, and the open source plugins. Now I want to explain a little bit further on the reference data API. For each region, country, province, they all have their own geopolitical identifiers that are relevant to them. For instance, if I'm in Europe collecting data, I want to make sure my system is not looking for a USDA number, which is a United States reference. So we need to make sure that only the correct information is being pulled. Then we also want to have, this is where we use our controlled vocabularies to make sure that we're all calling it the same thing or that it's referred to as the same thing. This goes for product information, seed references, and branding, as well as other specifications. And these are all held in a library that is currently managed by AgGateway, and so there's always, this is something that is going to be built up over time. So everyone that gets involved, if your company is using the ADAPT framework and there are certain references that you need added to this database, you simply need to tell AgGateway and it'll be added in. So this is going to get richer and richer over time. And the reference data API uses what we call context items. And here you see the nomenclature that is used for this documentation that also has temporal context and is some capability for nested items for using multi-attribute data. So here's an overview that has another way of looking at the function here. Starting with the machine and the information on here, I've used for the visual, the CNH proprietary plugin that we're working on and will be out very soon. So you'd start with the machine and you would send it through the proprietary plugin, which would put the output into the ADAPT object model. Oops. So then from there, you'd move it from the ADAPT object model. The FMIS would be able to then read that ADAPT data and put it in the format that they want to work with. And they would, at the same time, use the reference data API to get the correct context along with it for a more full readout of that data. Then if they wanted to move it to another software service, FMIS, they would use the ADM plugin or the ADAPT plugin to serialize the data to prepare it for movement over to FMIS. Here in the yellow box, you see an important note. File transfer is not in the scope of ADAPT. So there is no functionality within ADAPT for actually moving the data from one place to another. It is a translation tool, and it's this last step is packaging that data to be moved, but it's not actually moving it. That'll be available in whatever circumstance you're in. But then once that FMIS receives the data, it then uses the reference data API and puts it into whatever format it needs to work with it, and then it can do its analysis or whatever it needs to do to function. So the good thing about ADAPT, the great thing about ADAPT is it was built as an open source tool, because the idea is the more people, more industries, more companies that use it, the more valuable it's going to become. So the data model itself and the framework, it is all open source. Now, when an OEM builds their proprietary plugin, they own the rights to it, but the idea is that they will license it for free for use, but they always have the right to charge for it if they had a special circumstance. But the idea is that as many of these as possible would be built, and we're trying, the more that they're out there, the more feedback we get, the more valuable all of these plugins are. The most common question I get about ADAPT is, when will it be done? And there are two answers to this question. The first answer is, yes, it's done now. It's being used out in the field now, and you can incorporate it right now. the other answer is it will never truly be done because it's always going to be improved. Every company that builds their own plugin is also going to provide feedback, which is going to go into the next improvement within the object model. And so we're looking forward to that. We're excited about it. And we also have 2 committees that within AgGateway that are always managing this, and you are all welcome to join in that discussion. We have a technical committee and a business committee that meet to make sure that we're always managing this and improving it continually. Here's a list of some of the companies that have publicly committed to support ADAPT, but some of these have already put out their ADAPT plugin. The companies you see in green already have an existing plugin that is out and working. The companies that are in gold have stated that they're already working on their plugin, so it will be out soon. And special note down at the bottom, you see the IOF2020 project. That's not a company, but they did have a proof of concept using ADAPT. And so my colleagues will talk more about that here shortly. On the right, you see a number of software companies that have committed to integrate the framework of ADAPT. And these lists are growing week by week. If you want to get started on ADAPT or simply learn as much as possible about it to see if it's right for your company, you can start at adaptframework.org. There you'll find the source code within GitHub repositories, overview and ADAPT, some videos that are very helpful, frequently asked questions, and most of all, you have the resource of providing feedback and asking questions at adapt.feedback@aggateway.org. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're simply just asking questions, we can answer them, but of course we'll answer all the questions that come in through today's presentation. And again, if you want to learn more, I thank you for your attention on this. Now I'm going to turn things over to my colleagues, but as always, if you want to learn more about ADAPT, go to adaptframework.org or AgGateway.org. And give me 1 second while I switch here to presentations, and then I'm going to introduce my colleague, Vandecaveye.
Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. So I'm Vandecaveye. I'm working for CNH Industrial. I'm also doing industry relations just as Dan. So I was involved in designing the strategy for connectivity and analytics. But the more we move in that digital age, the more we see that it's not just about CNH Industrial, it's about the whole data ecosystem where everybody is involved and where data need to be able to flow seamlessly. So this involves working on standards, but also regulatory stuff and other things outside CNH Industrial. So I brought here with me Jason Roesbeke, who is also involved in the IOF2020 project that I'm going to talk about right now. So I consider it a bit my personal mission to help establish that ecosystem that will bring another level of improvements to the productivity of the farmers. All right. So for those who are not from Europe, I need to give you a little explanation how Europe works. We've got a good system of subsidies. So when the European government wants to get something accomplished, either they make new laws, or in a more positive way for innovative things, they give money to do certain things. And they see that there's a lot of potential benefit from digitization. And Internet of Things and new technologies. So they organized large-scale demonstrators of these technologies, and they're doing that in different industries, automotive, smart living, smart logistics, but also in agriculture. And we participated in a project which is called Internet of Food and Farm, to demonstrate the value of these Internet of Things tools. So the consortium is led by Wageningen University and Research. This is the largest research organization in Europe. It's from the Netherlands. So it's a very large project. We've got 30 million subsidies right now, and this keeps 73 members busy. But now there's also an open call to attract more members, and there's more money for things to be done. So the way these demonstrator is organized is in 5 categories of different sorts of farming: and arable, dairy, fruit, vegetables, and meat. And the idea is that we have a use case there where we're going to demonstrate existing standards that are going to solve the interoperability issues that the farmers is facing today. So in our group, you've got CNH Industrial, but also the friends from ACO365 FarmNet, AgroIntelligence, Altera, Vernaland, and Aarhus University. So the idea was that with a critical mass of people, we implement the standard, and by that we pull forward the implementation of the standard. So we had a bit of an idea when we started this project that there were solutions similar to HTML5 that did not get implemented. So HTML5 exists for many years, but there were no websites in HTML5 because the browsers did not support it. But the browsers did not support HTML5 because there were no websites. So we had the same idea that this was the case in agriculture as well, with certain standards. So we're going to work on farm production, mainly on the inputs which come into the farm and the data which needs to flow out of the farm. And because we're machinery manufacturers and software companies, this is mainly about the equipment that we're using on the farm. So the idea is that in the future, the farmer will have a sort of a dashboard on his computer or laptop or tablet or whatever, where he can monitor all his activities on his farm. So this can be the machinery running around and performing tasks in the field, but this could also be managing drone imaging, controlling irrigation systems, and so on. But okay, we in the first place focus on ag machinery. So the idea is that we're going to solve interoperability issues with the solutions. And we start with making sure that everybody understands each other. And we found a very good solution in Adapt there from AgGateway. But then it's not only about the language, we also need to transfer the data. So we, in next phases, we will investigate solutions to send data back and forth. And the idea is that in the very last phase, this data transfer should be real-time, allowing real-time optimization and automation. So if we can fix all of this, then for the farmers, it will be much easier to handle data. They will have access to data in real time. Today they need to get to the tractor with a memory stick, download the data, put it in their desktop computer before they can analyze this. But all of this should be seamless and in real time. And moreover, they should have one place where they can see the data from all the farm assets and machinery together. So instead of connecting to different platforms from different manufacturers, they should have one all-encompassing dashboard. For the FMIS providers, life should become more easy as well, because with the same communication methods, they can talk to different machinery. So if they make a variable rate application, this should give no issues to be implemented by different colors of implements. They have the option to make decisions in real time. And if all of this works, then the online data transfer, which today is limited, will start to grow. So we will see much more automatic data processing in future. And then for us machinery manufacturers, there's also a benefit, because if the data flows and this data ecosystem gets established, it means that there's going to be much more services available that are going to connect to our machines. So the plan in IOF2020 that we're working on right now is fixing the language, the communication through the ADAPT toolbox. And we did a proof of concept there, and we found that it is very usable. So we're going to use this for the next steps, which is transferring the data. So we're also going to look at other standards which are available in that field, like EFDI from AEF. And we're also a bit adventurous in trying out new context management systems from ETSI, NGSI, and 1M2M. And now I will leave the rest of the presentation for Jason. So Jason is a programmer who actually built all of this and will be able to give you much more technical explanation about what we've done.
Thank you, Vic. So I'm Jason Roesbeke. For the first MVP of the farm-machine interoperability use case, we tried to investigate the offline interoperability problem. For this, we looked at the ADAPT framework from AgGateway. So here again, you see the flow of the ADAPT framework. I will go through a selection of the ADAPT framework steps that we have investigated and implemented in the IOF2020. First of all, using the ADAPT framework from a developer standpoint. It is written in C#. It is an open source project. You can see the source code in the GitHub link, the github.com/adapt. When starting, I suggest that you go to the ADAPT Framework org website and look at the application notes. If you have issues, email ADAPT Framework, adapt.feedback@aggateway.org. There's also a bi-weekly technical committee where you can bring up any issues if you have. As this is an open source project, you can join these meetings to also bring up new ideas with the data model. Know that the data model is very broad. Besides covering plant and log task use cases, it also covers irrigation, weather, and scouting use cases. So first, for the farm machine interoperability use case, we started with the proprietary format here, the CNH proprietary format. For this, CNH created a prototype plugin that read the CNH data, created a CNH data model, and a mapping to the ADAPT data model. Then the FMIS have partners within IOF2020, which are 365 FarmNet and also Agro and Tele, map the output of the CNH plugin to their own software data model and use the data in their software. Besides creating a first proprietary ADAPT plugin, we also use the ISO.xml plugin that is also available on the ADAPT GitHub page. This plugin does the conversion of the ISO 11783 data format or ISO-bus format to and from the ADAPT data model. Here you see a flow where a proprietary data format is converted to the ISO.xml format. You can also use the ISO.xml plugin to consume ISO.xml format from machines and to create prescriptions for the machines. Here you see the brands in IOF2020 that can create or consume that create ISO.xml format. The third plugin we used within the IOF2020 was the ADM plugin, also available on the ADAPT GitHub page. This plugin does the serialization and derealization of the ADAPT plugin. The data set in ADAPT can then be exchanged between applications. Note this is a plugin intended to use only for one-to-one data exchange, as you see here. Here you see two FMISs on the left and on the right, using the ADM plugin when the first FMIS, FMIS A, received and converted a CNH dataset with the CNH ADAPT plugin. It is important to know again that the scope of the ADAPT framework does not include the actual transfer of the data between the two applications, as you see in the middle of the slide. The next slides, I will show you some visualization of using the ADAPT framework. First, reading the proprietary format on the left. On the right, you see the visualizer, a developer tool also developed by AgGateway to use ADAPT plugins. Here you see the guidance lines from another use case inside IOF2020, the use case soya protein management use case. The data here was coming from a Case IH combine. The left is from a software that could be read by a CNH proprietary format. The middle is the visualization of the ADAPT data model containing the data. And on the right is the created ISO.xml using the ISO.xml ADAPT plugin. And here you could see the flow rate. Again, left the CNH proprietary data format, the middle the flow rate in the ADAPT data model, and in the right the ISO.xml. And here the reference moisture. The next slides will show you some visualizations on using the ISO.xml plugin. the field boundary from a Fennerland machine. You see the left is the ISO XML data format, and the right again the visualizer of the adapt data model. Then here the as applied data of the same fields from the same machine. Then you can also get the machine implement and the section configuration here from an Echo machinery mapped into adapt data model. So what are the next steps in the FR machine interoperability use case? The second MVP. This is using adapt in the cloud API. And again, thank you for your time. Any questions? Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Jason. And thanks, Dan and Vic, for presenting. Great presentations. Appreciate that. Okay, I want to remind all of our participants that you can post questions in your control panel. And we have quite a few questions already, and you can just keep them coming. So let's start walking through the questions. So first question is, can we see adapt as an extension of ISOBUS in terms of data model? There are common elements, I suppose.
Yes, Jason here. So the adapt framework is based on the ISO XML, so you could see it indeed as an extension for the further value chain of food.
But it's about much more. There's also irrigation and other elements in it that do not exist in ISO XML.
Okay, great. Next question is, who enters the data in the context items, and how is it maintained if something changes? And maybe I could take an initial answer to that question. So AgGateway in North America has a Standards and Guidelines Committee, and a working group within that Standards and Guidelines Committee is the Controlled Vocabulary Working Group. And so we have just started that working group, and we have been testing RESTful web service APIs around retrieving, searching for, posting context item data. And so presently, it's just a Controlled Vocabulary Working Group in AgGateway North America that maintains it, but we certainly plan to open that up more broadly for anybody to contribute to it. Jason, Dan, Vic, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think you have it covered, and the bottom line there is it's something that's going to, like as I said, it's going to get more populated and more valuable over time. Yep,
exactly. Okay, moving on. Next question is, this is a question about what reference data is. So the question is, reference data would, for example, be data about the machine that one needs to correctly interpret the data. Or actually, it's a question. Is that true?
Not necessarily to interpret the data, but to have context around the data. So as I mentioned, in the U.S., we think of USDA numbers. There are county line numbers. There's other reference data that might be used by insurance companies or land information. In Germany, I know they have very specific needs for that context data. So it's a variety of information that you might need as reference data that's around the field operations data.
Right. It could include machine data with respect to machine parameters, distances, things like that. But so, for example, maybe maximum horsepower, but the actual horsepower at a given point in time in an operation wouldn't be reference data. Other reference data could include things like, well, here's a very simple one, country code list. That's a very common and simple example of reference data. Currency code list, commodity codes, things like that. So any sort of data that is defined in advance and can be sent to the machines that can then be used in the operational data. Okay, next question is, and I think I can answer this one fairly quickly, although Connie Graumans, you may want to add a comment here, so be ready for that. The question is there some adoption or interest about ADAPT from the animal husbandry industry? And the answer to that question is no, or at least not that I know of. There is some interest in New Zealand. Certainly companies in the Netherlands are familiar with ADAPT, but there aren't, the ADAPT data model does not contain content that is required to support animal husbandry. But Wageningen University has done some really important work around modeling data requirements for animal husbandry. And the ADAPT team is aware of that. And at the time that it makes sense to begin incorporating support for those requirements in ADAPT, they'll certainly look to that data model for approaches to implement those requirements. So Connie, is there anything else you want to add to that question?
Well, I think you explained it very well. There are some very interesting data flows in animal husbandry we would like to address, and one of them is the data exchange with milking robots. So from the International ICAR organization of breeding organizations, they developed a standard for data exchange with milking robots and feeding systems. And it would be a nice exercise to see if we can also make or expand our ADAPT data model concerning that types of data flows. And there's another very important data flow concerning slaughter data. So there is some international interest in working on standardizing the exchange of slaughter data. And that also might be an interesting topic to see if we can solve that using the ADAPT frameworks. And so there's a lot of potential in using the ADAPT framework in a wider, in a broader context in animal husbandry.
Okay, thank you, Connie. And by the way, I mentioned Connie in the introduction. Connie is the managing director of AgGateway Europe. Okay, next question. This is a question, as I take it, about what we mean by real time when we talked about ADAPT. So the question is, when talking about real time in IOF, do we talk about milliseconds of transport time, or are seconds to a minute still seen as real time for the use cases?
Yeah, near real time or pseudo real time. It's not actually real time, because real time, I'm always in discussions with engineers that say real time is within a millisecond, but we consider real time in a minute. That's already a big step forward considering the data transfer which is happening with the memory stick today.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, the next question is, does the ISO XML ADAPT plugin already support tlg.bin files?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, does the ISO XML ADAPT plugin already support tlg.bin file?
Yes. Oh, so the binary files, yes, indeed.
Mm-hmm.
So it's you can use a read or get the yield data or the binary data of ISO XML format. Yes.
Okay. All right. Next question. If I collect information from the ISO bus of a machine through CAN, can I process this raw information in ADAPT and get maps from it?
This is more technical question, but maybe I can give you a little bit an answer. So I guess the question is that if you got streaming data from the CAN bus, you want to start filling in an ADAPT data model. It is possible, but it's depending on how much It's not that intended, I guess. It's another. So if you would want to do that, you would use ISO.xml for that. You got the task control, you got a lot of extra tools and a lot of existing technologies in AEF that could help you logging things from the canvas on that side. But if you want to do it on a higher value chain, you would then use ADAPT framework.
Okay. All right. Next question. This seems to focus a lot on taking data from machinery and putting it into data analysis tools. What about getting the outputs from those tools, for example, variable rate maps, and sending those back to machinery?
So for this, you could use again the ISO.xml plugin. So the ISO.xml plugin has a two-way direction. You can read the ISO.xml, but you can also create ISO.xml. So for example, the prescriptions.
Okay, next question is, can the ADAPT data model describe weather, soil, and plant, for example, leaf wetness, related measurements?
Wow. We're getting some very, very good questions, and that one I'm not really sure.
I would refer to asking this to the technical team.
Yeah. So maybe I could touch on that a little bit. So I don't know the answer for sure to that question. I do know that within AgGateway North America, there has been a lot of work over the last couple of years around irrigation requirements, adding irrigation requirements support into ADAPT. And a key aspect of that is something called observations and measurements. And so the team has done a great deal of work in that area. And I would be really surprised if weather, soil, and plant, leaf wetness related measurements are not supported. But we can follow up with the technical team and confirm that. Good questions. Keep them coming. The next question is, can we legally publish code implementing ISO 11783? Yeah, let me take a stab at that one since I'm on AgGateway staff. So that question has come up a couple times, and it's come up in other contexts. For example, a tool being developed to implement ISO 15000 Part 5 core components. I don't know that there has been any particular, legal advice about that, but a number of people, or anyone who's sort of observed behavior over the years, as long as you are not publishing the actual text of the documents, in other words, you go to ISO website, you pay money, you get a PDF, and that PDF is licensed to you. But the whole idea of creating standards is to implement them. And no one that I've talked to has ever been aware of anybody being questioned about implementing code and even open source code and publishing that open source code for implementing an ISO standard. In fact, that's exactly what the standards committees would expect. Now, having said all that, I am far from a lawyer, and laws vary by jurisdiction. So if this is a really important concern to you, I would recommend you contact your company's legal counsel. But as far as we know, we're pretty comfortable with that. Vic, Dan, Jason, Connie, anything you want to add to that?
Not from our end.
Not from my end either.
I would think you'd want to kind of stay away from that one. Yeah, good question. Okay, so the next question is regarding ISO XML and ADAPT. To make it very clear, I suppose yield, for example, has the same meaning / ID in ISO XML and ADAPT, or not?
So this would then be talking about the representation of data. The adapt data model, it has a lot of references to the ISO XML standard, to the DDI number. So to that answer, I would say yes.
Okay. Okay, so another question. There's a couple parts to this, and I can actually answer one part. It says, only to confirm, is there any cost to use the adapt plugin? So the answer to that is no. You may recall a slide that Dan presented early on that listed adapt framework, ISO XML plugin, adapt plugin, and those plugins were listed as open source. So anything listed as open source can be freely used. It can be modified. You can do almost anything you want with it. I think there's some attribution requirements, but yeah, there are no license fees to use it. Then the next part, it says, and all vocabulary adjustments are made by the company that has the desire to integrate with the plugin, correct? Yeah, yeah. Can anybody answer? I'm not sure what vocabulary adjustments mean, but
right. It depends on what they mean by vocabulary adjustments. So some of the AgGateway is working on several standardized glossaries and references, but for the translation of the data, it's adapt is meant to identify terms within the proprietary format and translate it out. And if there are a specific glossary you want to use or you want to add to those standardized glossaries, anyone could do that.
Oh, so yeah, I think you're right. I think you interpreted the question correctly. Yeah, then the follow-on question. These are all questions right in a row in the same post. It says, AgGateway provides a list with the correct names, and we make the adjustments before beginning the integration. So adjustments being transformation from one code to another. And I think that the answer to that would be yes. Now, let me make one point here. When we say AgGateway does this or that, it's important to understand that AgGateway is its members. So when we say AgGateway does this or that, what we're saying is companies in the industry who are members of AgGateway work together to do these things. And one aspect of the control vocabulary that I didn't mention is that the controlled vocabulary working group has a plan to identify correspondences between codes, so that if one uses a code from one code list, you can know that that code means the same thing as various other codes in other code lists. So hopefully this adjustment process or translation or transformation process, as indicated in the question, would be addressed. Okay, the next question, we have a few more, and they keep coming in. Oh, somebody's asking, side note, can we as listeners also see the questions other people ask? Actually, that's a good question. I don't know. Well, I can certainly send them out after the once we wrap up here. Actually, I'd send them out on Monday. I'm not sure how to make that happen in the GoToWebinar control panel. So, and you all don't want me to wait around. You all don't want to wait around while I try to make that happen. But anyway, we will provide the questions, and of course, these questions and answers will be in the what we publish on YouTube. Oh, actually, yeah. So there's just some other comments thanking you all for presenting and answering questions. So that's it for the questions. Let me check for any raised hands. I don't see that. Okay, so that covers all the questions. So Dan, Vic, Jason, Connie, any final comments before we wrap up?
Nothing from me. Just the most important slide of all the presentations is the one that's up right now, and that's seeing where you can get more information to learn more about it. And again, I encourage everyone who wants to know more to have a conversation with members of AgGateway or get involved themselves, and whether they're in Europe or Latin America or North America or anywhere.
Yeah. Oh, Connie, do you want to say a couple words about the upcoming AgGateway Europe meeting?
Yes, well, I can do the invitation. We have a meeting coming up in Markt Oberdorf. ECHO is hosting this meeting in the southern parts of Germany. So it's an open meeting. So we invited all the AgGateway active people we are aware of. But if you are interested in joining this meeting, you can send a mail to Jim or to me, and we will. Well, you're welcome to join, of course. And the essence of this meeting in Markt Oberdorf is to focus on the pain points in data exchange in agriculture. That's a bit wider than only precision farming. It covers the entire supply chain. So if you're interested to think along and come up with some input for that discussion, you're very welcome. And of course, from AgGateway Europe, I would like to thank Vic and Dan and Jim for organizing and for giving this very interesting presentation about implementing the ADAPT framework. So very, very big thanks from Europe.
Okay, yeah, so we're wrapping up now. Let me just tell you what we will do in the next few days. So my plan is that by Monday, we will publish this webinar on YouTube. We will make available the slides in PDF form, and then also publish the questions that were asked. I won't commit to saying that we'll publish the answers in written form, but the questions and answers will be in the audio recording. Yeah, so again, thanks Dan, Vic, Jason, Connie for preparing and presenting today, and thanks to all of you for joining us. We've offered several webinars over the last few years, and we've received a lot of positive feedback, including suggestions for improvement. So please let us know what topics interest you. If there's anything today you would like us to drill down on, let us know. Maybe we'll offer another webinar or point you to an existing webinar recording on YouTube. You can email me at jim.wilson, W-I-L-S-O-N, at aggatewayglobal.net. And you'll see my email when I send a follow-up email to this. So again, thanks again, and I look forward to you joining future webinars. Take care.